Williams, and to my left here I've got Ashley Levine and Bern Johnson. Our discussion tonight now is Rainy Lake Aristocracy. We're going to move in chronological order. I'm going to start off with E.W. Bacchus and Ernest Oberholser, and I'll pass it off to Ashley, who will do William Hapgood, Dr. N.H. Sheldrick, and Frederick Dunsmore. And Bern then will finish up with Major Horace Roberts, Gloria Dahlberg, and Harry French. And I find it interesting that Bern actually knew these people, so it should be very interesting. I want everybody to remember that this is a discussion. It's not a lecture. Nobody wants to be lectured in a bar. We've all been involved in a lot of discussions in bars, so please remember that the bar is open during this discussion. And Cynthia is filming, and we have another lady filming here, so please try not to block this. So, and also please note that we do have a donation, free will donation jar. The museum would appreciate it very, very much if you could help us out that way. But I'm going to start with Egbert Wellington Bacchus. He was born in 1861 near Red Wing, Minnesota. And as a young man in the lumber business, was very, very successful in Minneapolis and southern Minnesota. He first came to Borderland in 1892, and rumor has it that he and a partner snowshoed for about 200 miles because he wanted to take a look at the Koochiching Rapids. He realized after he saw it that it had the potential of 30,000 horsepower. His plans were to dam the rapids and to build paper mills. He secured riparian rights to build 3 dams, the one right here downstream from us, and then the 2 at Kettle Falls. He enjoyed great success. By 1914, he had the dams completed, and he had paper mills in International Falls and Fort Francis. But Bacchus also was on the lake. He had a houseboat built in 1910, and shortly after built his summer home on Red Sucker Island. That island has been called Curtis Island after and Windsong, but on the maps you'll notice it's still called Red Sucker. He entertained guests both on the houseboat and the island. And he also had a passenger type vessel named after his wife, the Elizabeth B. And he later sold that vessel to my grandfather, Robert Sloan Williams, who renamed it the Mayflower and used it to haul passengers and freight to and from Kettle Falls. But did E.W. Bacchus enjoy Rainy Lake? In my research, I could find very, very little about whether he was interested in touring the lake or hunting on the lake or fishing on the lake. He was a dynamic businessman, and being on the lake there would actually be no communication between he and his business interests. So I think that he didn't really spend a lot of time away and enjoying this part of the country. But a side note to this is in 1912, his houseboat, it had to be named the Loafer, was parked in Harrison Bay on Rainy Lake, Dryweed Island. His son Raymond, age 22, was found shot dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and it was deemed to be a hunting accident. Very unfortunate situation. But E.W. had more plans for the Rainy Lake watershed. However, there was a new face on Rainy Lake that would turn out to be quite a barrier for his ambitions. And that, of course, would be Ernest Carl Oberholser. Ober, I'm going to refer to him as Ober, was born in 1884 in Davenport, Iowa, and he was 23 years younger than E.W. He was Harvard educated. He first came to Rainy Lake in 1909 because of a doctor's advice that he had with his heart problems, that he had just 1 year to live unless he got some clean air. That particular summer, 1909, he canoed most of the Rainy Lake watershed. his total was estimated to be around 3,000 miles. And he said that for every stroke of the paddle, he felt better. But Ober was immensely interested in the Ojibwe culture, and he began to learn their language and write their legends. In 1912, he made his epic trip to Hudson Bay with his Indian companion, Billy Maggie. Bob Hilke, I don't think Bob is here tonight, but he's got an excellent program on Ober on that almost unbelievable journey. But Ober continued to canoe and write, and was given, because of a lot of respect, was given the Ojibwe name for storyteller, which was Atsakan. By 1915, Ober was permanently established on Rainy Lake. His mailing address from then on was right here, Ranier, Minnesota. And to supplement his income from writing, Ober assisted Major Horace Roberts, we'll talk about him later, and his summer building on Atsakan Island, named after Ober. That was 1916. He also assisted, a little later that year, Boria Dahlberg on his Red Crest. We'll talk about him later. And in 1917, he had a partner, William Hapgood, and they started a utopian project on Deer Island on Rainy Lake. That's where Camp Cooch is now. That lasted 5 years, and it ended up going away, but Ober ended up with the Review Islands, or the Japanese Islands as they're called, and part of Sandpoint Island. And at this time, Ober never married, of course, but at this time his mother, Rosa, was with him. And Ober then, with Mallard Island, part of the Review, with his carpenter, Emil Johnson, been constructing the buildings that you see there now to this day. And also, at the same time, Bacchus's ambitions of many more dams in the Rainy Lake watershed began to get quite a bit of attention. Now, he and Ober were within sight of each other. They actually were neighbors on the lake. And no two neighbors were more opposite. E.W. was a large man physically, while Ober was slight. And E.W. wanted the waterway dammed for expansion and jobs and progress, while Ober wanted the waterway kept wilderness and preserved for future generations. It was quite the battle, needless to say. But eventually, with the passage of the Shipstead-Nolan Act in 1930, Ober technically was on the winning side. No longer could lake levels be altered on federal lands except by specific consent of Congress. But by this time, Bacchus had fallen on bad times. Competition from rival paper companies cut the price of newsprint in half. The Great Depression cut demand more than in half. And Bacchus's interests, very shortly, in the early 30s, were in receivership. However, he never gave up. He kept fighting to regain his losses and his dignity. But he ended up dying of a heart attack in New York City on the 29th of October, 1934, at the age of 73. When Ober heard of E.W.'s passing, he did not rejoice. In fact, he was quoted as saying, I'll use his exact words, "I'll miss E.W. One cannot be in a harness with a teammate so long without missing him." So you can see that Ober was not a different person by any means. Ober continued to live on Rainy Lake year-round. His mother had passed away by that time, so he was alone. Although he had lots of company in the summer months, he would spend months alone on Mallard Island in the winter. He continued to be a gracious and generous host and advisor to his many Ojibwe friends. And Ober died in International Falls on June 6, 1977. He was 93. Not bad for a man that had 1 year to live in 1909. But now I'm going to talk about those two gentlemen and their involvement with my family. I've got here that E.W. Bacchus and his mill and his Kettle Falls dams have had a profound effect on my family. My father, Charlie Williams, with a growing family, went to work in the mill, Bacchus' mill, in 1934. 1965, he took over the dam tender position at Kettle Falls. So for over 40 years, he received a paycheck from the company. My aunt, Margaret Jesperson Casey, retired from the mill in the insurance division. My uncle, Harold Jesperson, retired from the Woodlands division. And my uncle Wayne Jesperson retired from the woodroom. Both myself and my brother Chuck held the dam keeper's position at Kettle Falls for many years. So technically, we worked for Bacchus interests. But Ober also had an effect upon my family's life. My mother, Blanche Jesperson Williams, worked as Ober's housekeeper during the summer of 1930, the year she graduated from high school. And Ober was a friend of my grandparents, Andrew and Hulda Jesperson, and was a frequent visitor at the Jackfish Bay farm. And Ober at times, this is how I remember him, would have dinner at her family house at 622 12th Avenue in the Falls. But Ober and his friends' lead in the effort to keep the Superior Quetico and the BWCA wilderness eventually led to the formation of Boisier's National Park. This allowed the Kettle Falls Hotel to be rebuilt, reopened, and remain my family. But to close, I'd like to say that these two men, E.W. Bacchus and Ernest Oberholser, most likely did more to influence our Rainy Lake watershed than anybody else ever had. Thank you.
Before I get started, I would just like to reiterate for the people who may have come in and missed out, we do have an exhibit set up. If you'd like to see what these people look like, what their homes look like, their boats, or any of the other things that we're talking about, please do check out the exhibit when we're done so that you're able to see those things. So the group of people that I'm going to be talking about is William Hapgood. And William Hapgood, he comes from a very wealthy family. His family was involved in farm machinery. To begin with, he's a Harvard graduate. And then after he graduates from Harvard, he convinces his father to purchase a canning company. And it gets renamed the Columbia Conserve Company. And this company never actually makes any money. They're continuously in the red. And William has this idea of creating a utopian workplace for employees where they would be able to determine their own hours, set their own wages, do all of these sorts of things, and of course that just isn't going to work. And then a few years after that, he decides that he's going to come up to Rainy Lake, and he purchases Tillison's Island, which is renamed to Deer Island, and is now Grassy Island today. When he actually comes up here isn't quite certain, because in reading some of the correspondence, he tends to summer here very modestly previous to purchasing the island. He's doing some camping and stuff, but those dates are a little, it's just not super clear. But his intent with Deer Island was to kind of carry on this utopian thought. He wanted to have this self-contained summer community. The island was 375 acres, and then in a fertile valley he would make a garden. They were going to have livestock, they would have eggs, chickens, and then he also built a store, and he put little cottages on this island for guests to be able to rent. And with these cottages and these rentals, he was going to provide boats for people to take. It would only cost 50 cents to take a trip to town. And so it was just going to be this really interesting little commune that he wanted to have out there. And the appeal was going to be towards artists, musicians, students, and if that sounds familiar to anyone, we already have something out there like this today on Mallard Island, and this is because he ends up meeting Ober on Atsakan Island in 1916, and so he enlists Ober to help him formulate this idea, and Ober begins working on these projects for him. And with that employment for Ober, he was extremely relieved to have employment with William Hapgood because he realized that he wasn't going to be making any money studying the Ojibwe and doing his research this way. So by having this employment, he was going to be able to have money on a regular basis. Ober did bring his mother with out to this farm, and they would, raise lambs, and they were doing things like that. And then during World War I, they were selling eggs and things like that for super high prices. They were getting over $1 a dozen for eggs at that time. In 1920, Deer Island was formally incorporated, and this was likely because they were going to get some financial gain and legal support for that. And they took on a third partner at that time. It was International Falls attorney John Brown. But in 1921, the Columbia Conserve Company suffered some reverses, and so as a result of that, William Hapgood kind of pulled back from investing any more money because he was just losing money hand over fist. So that leaves Ober in 1922 kind of standing there with an empty bag. He has nothing to show for all of this hard work that he's put in building all of these cabins and taking care of all of these people and digging holes and doing all these sorts of things that he's doing out there. So Hapgood ends up offering him kind of these several options. He either can take $5,000 in cash, which would be paid after all the corporate debts were paid, or he could take Sandpoint Island, which was something that they had purchased several years prior because they wanted to expand, but they weren't ever able to do that. But then what ends up happening is that apparently William forgot that he had already made an arrangement with Ober that if he couldn't pay him, that he was going to give him the Review Islands. So Ober ends up getting Mallard Island first, and the deed for that is mailed to him on March 9th of 1922. And he also does accept Sand Point, which he does own for about 50 years, but he never actually develops it. He always leaves it open and available for public use so people can go swimming and picnic there. And then about 2 years before he dies in 1975, he does end up signing that over to the Ontario province, and they still today use it in kind of that spirit of free public use. And despite the failure of Deer Island, Ober was never bitter about it. He did reflect on his experience there with positivity, and he was quoted in saying that it did improve his health, it gave him bigger muscles, and he also learned a certain fluency in northern profanity. So he wasn't bitter about his time spent there. William Hapgood does finally fully leave Rainy Lake by the end of 1920. He never does visit here again, likely due to a loss of his vision. How he loses his vision, it wasn't really said, but he did no longer visit here any longer. So that is the story of William Hapgood and Ober. Do you want to go into yours, or do you want me to continue with Sheldrick? Okay. So we're going to move into Dr. Frederick Dunsmore and Dr. Sheldrick. Now they owned Home Island. Originally it was just going to be Dr. Sheldrick, but there wasn't as much information as I had hoped, and we couldn't really talk about Home Island without talking about Dr. Dunsmore. He is a fascinating character. So Dr. Dunsmore was a Minneapolis surgeon. He was extremely well known and well respected in the early 1900s as far as surgery goes. Because it was kind of sketchy at the time, he was definitely the person that you wanted to have operating on you. He was exceedingly wealthy, and he was really at the top of the Minneapolis social register. He was described as kind of having this really cold, hard, business-like exterior, but in reality it was really the opposite. He was very fun-loving, jovial, very generous. And he comes to Rainy Lake when he's 56 years old in 1909. He purchases Home Island from his brother Irving. Irving dealt in realty, and he buys the island in 1905 originally from a Canadian realtor who came to him and was telling him, you know, how great the area is, and Bacchus is doing all of this amazing work. And Irving knew who Bacchus was, but, you know, to be really quite frank, he thought Bacchus was kind of full of crap. He didn't think that Bacchus was going to be very successful in his endeavors, but the more he listened to this kid, he thought, oh, well, you know, maybe it'll be something. So he decides that he's going to buy this property, but he doesn't do anything with it, so he sells it to Frederick, and Frederick thinks it's the greatest thing. And he builds this extremely lavish home, and the home was made for entertaining. It had a very large great room with wraparound porch. It has a huge stone fireplace, and he built guest quarters and cabins, and he also created an observation tower for people to, you know, go out and check out the sights. Dr. Dunsmore also had a real appreciation for the native culture. He frequently purchased a lot of goods and food from them, and he didn't try to, you know, barter or rip anyone off, this also included the native people. And I don't want to say that he treated them like a spectacle with his friends. I think it was really more that he wanted to share in how interesting they were, but he would take his friends out in the boat, and he really wanted to educate his visitors on the lifestyle, and the native people seemed to really enjoy this, and they come out and, you know, they were getting something out of it too, because they were selling moccasins and wild rice to these people, and they were just throwing money at them, so. And coming up for Dr. Dunsmore's parties was a really big deal. I would probably equate this to kind of getting the golden ticket to going to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It's one of those things where everyone wanted to go. The minute you stepped on the train, it was, you know, top dollar cigars, expensive cognac, the whole 9 yards. As soon as they'd get to the island, the cocktail hour started, and he had a couple of different traditions. People could climb up to the observation tower and, you know, check it out. It wasn't mandatory though. But the one tradition that was mandatory that took place just shortly after cocktail hour, everyone's, you know, half in the bag, they're all kind of dressed up, and they decide that they're going to go out and walk along the rocks because he wants everyone to meet his little friend, his hermit that lives in a cave. So you have all of these really dressed up drunk people walking along, going into this cave, and the doctor thinks it's really funny, and he has a few friends that have already been initiated, and he gets into the cave, he goes into the corner, no one can see anything, and he raises up his glass and he makes a toast, and then all of a sudden somebody turns on one of the little gas lanterns, and they get to see that here Dr. Dunsmore has this little tiny figurine that is made out of plaster of Paris, all dressed up in evening wear, holding a glass. So it's just this fake little stone statue, and he does this with everyone, and he thinks it's really funny, and they all laugh, and they go back and continue the party. I don't know. And then, you know, after they go back and they have their dinner, another one of his classic party moves is his moonlight evening cruises on the lake in the Explorer. The Explorer was his flagship. He really enjoyed taking people out and bringing them on the lake and cutting the engine and just letting the Explorer kind of drift along, and they'd pop the champagne and play the piano. There is a story that one time they got kind of stuck out on the lake and the waves got pretty big and the piano ended up not on the boat anymore. And people were not excited about that. The Explorer also frequently found a lot of rocks on Rainy Lake. It's said that Rainy Lake, before it was officially ever chartered, Dr. Dunsmore was the one that found all of the rocks, and he was pretty proud of that. He definitely liked to tell everybody that he left paint on every single rock in Rainy Lake. He was a deep promoter of Rainy Lake. He loved it here. But by 1925, the doctor was 72 years old. His health was failing, and his days at Rainy Lake were just kind of really coming to an end, so he was going to have to kind of pass the torch on to someone else. So this is where the Sheldrick family starts to come in, and actually they're kind of involved a little bit before this. So he is the uncle of Eva Dunsmore, and this is where the connection hits into that family, is that Eva Dunsmore marries Nicholas Sheldrick. He takes her as his second wife. They get married in August of 1918. And so this is probably about the time that they start summering here. And Dr. Sheldrick and Dr. Dunsmore also worked together. But Dr. Sheldrick purchases Louise Island in 1920, and they come and they're camping, not really modestly, but they're in like kind of okay cabins. And then by 1930, when Dr. Dunsmore has passed away, Dr. Sheldrick takes ownership of Home Island. So in 1931, Dr. Sheldrick has to retire. He's forced to retire at the age of 58 due to a heart condition. But he has a super great insurance policy, and so they're paying him a premium every month. But the insurance company is afraid that he's still practicing medicine, so they hire a private investigator to come up here and follow him around and make sure that he's not practicing medicine because they don't want to pay him. So he's pretty particular to make sure that he's not doing anything that could be construed as practicing. Now, the rest of this account comes from a family member. This is a nephew. But the nephew wrote about that, he and Nicholas spent a lot of time canoeing. Nicholas was a very big fan of going out in his canoe. They frequently liked to call on the Frenches. They liked to go visit Ober, but they never, ever, ever, ever went to visit Bacchus or Dahlbergs in their canoe because they were too, quote, la-di-da to go in the canoe, to go visit them. You didn't do that. It was not okay. Nicholas also enjoyed going for brisk walks around his island, probably, I would assume, because he was trying to keep his heart healthy. He did that every single morning. And every Wednesday they went to town for groceries. Nicholas was always happy to take shopping lists for ladies that couldn't go. He would take his friends. But you had to be there by 7:45 because he was leaving at 8 o'clock. You weren't there at 8 o'clock, you could be paddling after him, and he's leaving you. See you next week. You're going to have to eat berries or something. Nicholas really enjoyed taking lunch at the Chicago Cafe. He always ate a meal of pike and boiled potatoes with melted butter. That was it, nothing else. Don't give him anything, he's not going to eat it. He really enjoyed playing rook. He frequently won. His nephew's pretty sure he cheated, but, you never know. Dinner was always a very formal affair with the Sheldrick family. They enjoyed leisurely trips with friends and neighbors on the Eva and the Eva II to the Cascades. They weren't so much a party family. They definitely weren't like the Dunsmores, but they kept it classy. And Nicholas Sheldrick, he was here until, I think he passed away in 1965, so he was still kind of hanging around for quite a while. And Home Island is still in the family today. They still like to come up. They summer here. They live here. And that is William Hapgood, Nicholas Sheldrick, and Dr. Dunsmore.
Before I start talking about the others, we bought our island on Rainy Lake from Dr. Bosworth, who referred to Dr. Sheldrick as one who specialized in diseases of the rich. I realize that's unfair because I come last. I'm going to talk about three families, Major Roberts and the Frenches, the Dahlbergs and the Frenches. And Major Roberts came up here as a connection out of Davenport, Iowa, had been directed up this way by Oberholser, who had been a classmate of his, that became his son-in-law, Harry French. Now, Roberts always went by the name Major, which is not a particularly high rank, but it was impressive for him. And he acquired that rank during World War I when he was part of the supply corps of the Army, and he acquired his wealth by the fact that he had a sash and door factory in Davenport, Iowa. He had sold millions of dollars, I presume, at that time of equipment for barracks, military barracks, and when the war ended, the government just bought out the contracts, and the Major did not have to do a lot more work after that. He didn't have to go to the office very often. He arrived at Rainy Lake in 1913, so this would have been the Oberholser connection, and before the war, and before his major wealth. His property was the island that is called Atsukan, and it is an island, looks like a dumbbell. It's actually two islands connected by a sandbar, and he had the main house on that. He had a boathouse, he had an ice house, he had a variety of guest cabins, and a caretaker's cabin on the south end. His boats, he had the Virginia, which is the only one of the boats of that era that is still back in service on Rainy Lake. And that had been his boat named for his one of his daughters. He did have two daughters, Dorothea, who married a Melanson and lived in Toronto, which is where the Major died. He had, we think that we're talking about the aristocracy, but the aristocracy did not exist without the caretakers, and he started out with the caretaker, Joe Miller, and then had Gerald and Olive Wagnus were for many years his caretaker, and they acquired the island when he no longer, when they came up to it. It's unclear as to just how old he was when he died. It was either 102 or 103. I know somebody had asked him one time, "What are you going to do, Major? You can't take it with you." He said, "I ain't going." And he almost didn't. The story is that when he died, he had less than $10,000 in assets, which was, he just outlived it. A couple of stories about Major Roberts. He loved taking advantage of anybody he could. He got a lot of enjoyment out of it. And insurance companies were something that he really liked. And he would go into a local insurance agent in the falls and say, "I lost my camera over the size of the boat, and it's a $50 camera and I want to be reimbursed." The agent would say, "Let me get a pad, I'll take down the information." And so the Major would say, "Nope, I don't do it that way. I've never submitted a claim I didn't win, and I'm not going to start now. You either tell me you're going to pay me, or I'll take my business elsewhere." And I'm sure there were a number of times when agents reached in their pocket, pulled out the $50, and got him out of them. He is also, to my understanding, he's the only one who ever collected from the insurance company following the flood of 1950. And because there was no flood insurance, nobody had flood insurance, and when he submitted a claim, they said, "No, you don't have any flood insurance." He said, "I'm not claiming on flood, I'm claiming on wind. If that water had just come up and stayed there 3 feet above normal, for the summer and gone down, I wouldn't have any claim, but the wind blew that water around just with a tree, and therefore I need to be paid, and apparently he was. He sold the island finally to the Wagners family, and they operated for a time as a resort. And and he didn't give them $1 off on the purchase price. And they've been faithful servants for years. But he just sold everything he could at whatever he could get. But he was a jolly guy. He was fun. He was always fun to be around. The Dahlbergs arrived on Rainy Lake as a result of the fact that Bror Dahlberg had come over as a child from Sweden and had gone to work for the Great Northern in Minneapolis, Great Northern Railroad, and one of his jobs as he worked his way up from office boy was to deal with negotiating rates. And he negotiated the rates with the paper company on shipping the product out of here. And he really took them into camp. Dahlberg, this young guy, got the best of the paper company, and Bacchus was so impressed, he hired him away. Now, it's hard to understand quite why you hire somebody who you know is very able to take advantage of somebody else, but anyway, they did. And he worked his way up here in the mill to the point of being a managerial position, and when a man named Carl Munch came along with a patent for the product which later became Insulate, Bacchus was very interested in that, and he bought the patent, but not in his name. He knew that as president of the company, he was not going to be able to hang on to much of the profits of this patent. So he took it out in the name of his trusted employee, Bror Dahlberg, and started producing Insulate. After a few years, I think it was about 3 years, Dahlberg just sued hell out of Bacchus for patent infringement and got enough money to start the Celotex Corporation, and then started making the same product out of sugarcane fibers down in Florida. Dahlberg was married to a Mary Alexander Dahlberg, and she was a socialite, and she, part of her act was to get Sinclair Lewis and a Spanish princess up to the island in the summer of 1926. They built buildings, a special guest house for them, built a teepee, the famous teepee that was on the island, and because they understood that Sinclair Lewis wanted to write in a round building. They had the main house, which later became Musket Inn. They also had the caretaker's house, the boathouse, a couple of bathhouses, the 2 guest houses. One of them burned in the summer of 1936, which was a reason for getting rid of their caretaker and hiring my father to come over as caretaker from Camp Koochiching. They also had the famous teepee that was a birch bark covered circular building and had a walkway up the back, ladder up to a platform that you could get a good view of the lake. It also had bright red, Chinese red cushions on seats around the teepee. and they was supposedly filled with live silk and were worth $200 each. Back in 1930s, that was a lot of money. A fireplace in the middle of the teepee, and they had a telephone system set up between the main house, the teepee, the guest house, and the caretaker's house. And the staff always hated the fact that there was one in the teepee because that's where they'd call and have drinks brought up. It was a long haul from the kitchen. His second brewer left, or got divorced from Mary and married a woman named Gilda Krieger. She was Major Roberts had an interesting comment on it. He said that Mary was an alcoholic and Gilda was a bitch. And in the Garden of Love, Brewer picks lemons. But she could be very charming too. But, they would load up their cruiser, which had originally been named the Elmar for their daughter and Mary, and changed the name to Gilda. And they would load up the boat and go into town and do night clubbing here in Ranier. And one evening they were in Williams nightclub, and the circus train came through from Canada, and everybody, the crew of the circus all came into the nightclub, and while they checked out the train, and when they were ready to leave, somebody stuck their head in the door and said, "Hey, Rube," which was a signal for the circus people to all go back and get on the train, which they did. And shortly after, the waitress came over and tapped Gilda Dahlberg on the shoulder and said, "Ma'am, I believe your train is leaving." So there were many stories about the goings on at that place. That was the only one of the major places that I think of that really had a full staff of crew. They would bring a cook and a butler from Chicago or New York up and spend the summer. They had a couple of locally hired maids. They had the caretaker's family. They had a handyman, and because he was the president, Brewer was the president of the Celtics Corporation, they did their business out of here, and would have a full-time secretary on staff for the corporation, which is a different world when you think of the communications we need today. At that time, if somebody wanted to make a phone call, you went to the Rex Hotel and to the telephone office to make the call. But they also had a masseur, a guy that worked on the bodies, we say. But they had a full-time staff at the island. It was an interesting place to live. And also Gilda had four sisters, and they all had kids. And so there were always a handful or more of young people from age 10 to 20, nieces and nephews of Gilda. I grew up there and I survived. The last of my topic is the Frenches, and Virginia French was, I mentioned, the daughter of Major Roberts. They, despite the fact that some people will tell you that this was a French mustard people, it was not. It was his company was called French and Hecht, and they made wheels of all different sizes and shapes in Davenport, Iowa, and did very well. Harry was a serious alcoholic. This is probably the most tragic of the families that we deal with on this. Harry was an alcoholic, died quite young. Audrey was his second daughter. She died in a boating accident in 1950 near Susan Island. And her sister, Jean, spent the night with her body on that island. And then the mother remarried and committed suicide. And to the best of my knowledge, Jean was still alive a few years ago in California, but I don't know any more about her than that. Their place was built in 1931, called Green Mansions, and it was I'm not sure whether it was Tudor or Norman architecture. I can't quite figure that out. I've always said Tudor, and with hewn beams in the living room, and a very ornate building. It was built in 1931, which was the depth of the Depression. The story is that they spent $100,000 on building that out when they were paying $1 a day for labor, $2 a day for the craftsmen, which would be the blacksmiths and cabinet makers and people like that. So it was a beautiful place. That also had a number of buildings, outbuildings. The island is very much a copy of Major Roberts Island, also a dumbbell island with two islands connected by a sandbar. And they made little use of the south end of the island, but they did have, besides the caretaker's house, the powerhouse, the main house, they had a very, very nice studio. There's a picture of it back here. That Virginia was an artist and used the studio. They also had a half-sized playhouse for the two girls. The girls were born in 1928, 1931, so they were very young at the time. Anyway, that's pretty much what we have to say about those three families anyway. And I think if there's any questions, are we?
Yeah, I have a question. I grew up in French Edition, and there was a boat that looked very much like Bacchus's boat. It was drawn up by the second bridge. And of course, we used to play in it, but it rotted away. Is that Bacchus's boat?
Anybody know?
I don't know, Rick.
No? No? Do you remember Folsom F. Murray? My grandfather was superintendent of MD&W Railroad with Folsom. He died in '56. Do you remember Folsom Murray?
I cannot.
All right. Two questions.
Where did they quarry the rock from for French's Island for the house?
I've heard stories that they poured it from the bottom of the lake, but that never made much sense to me.
Because the stone bases, they must have cut it.
Right. I really don't know.
I'm just curious, on a Saturday night in that time, when all these big boats came in, what was it like here on a Saturday night? Where did they dock everybody? And I mean, was it a happening place back in the day?
Ranier.
Ranier is always happening.
Well, and where did they dock everybody?
Well, they had a big dock down in Blue Street, huge dock, and that was one of the major centers, Paul.
Did they go through the rapids then?
Right.
Right under the bridge.
Yeah, it's true.
But the dock down there was huge. And that was the major docking point at that point. There are a few of them went out of the north side here, out of Vincennes and that kind of thing, but most of them docked down on Blue Street.
And it was, I would not think that there would necessarily be a lot of boats in at any one time. You know, nobody spent a lot of time here, but people would come in and do their shopping. The 2 grocery stores in town, or no, more than that. I'm sorry.
More than that, a
Yeah.
lot more than
Right.
that.
I think of the later years, when I was a boy.
I have a question. When was Dahlberg's in French Island? When did they leave?
When did they leave? The Dahlbergs, he died, let me check that.
I think Gilda's last visit was like 1950 something, 52. Gilda last stayed here.
I saw, I think it was 53. I believe that I saw Gilda in 53, but the last years, we left the island in 1945, and we were the last full-time caretakers there. And I know that I saw Gilda, I believe it was 53, but it could have been 52. But at that time, she was staying at Mabes Anderson's resort at Quanachuan and was not living at the island anymore. It was then vacant, you know, for many years, and then the Lynches acquired it and started Musket Inn, which operated for a few years. It had been terribly vandalized over those years.
What about French's Island?
Vern, what do you know about the story of the woman who fell off the cliff at Dahlberg's?
Fake news.
I thought somebody died. Didn't someone die at Dahlberg's, like rather famous death at Dahlberg's?
Yeah, we always heard the rumor that their son had died and drowned or something, and they had left and never came
That
back.
was fairies. Fairies. Fairies had a son that drowned, and they never came back after
Yeah.
that.
No, this was
Right.
at Dahlberg's.
It was always the Dahlberg mystery,
Right.
you know, right? Yeah,
Still is.
the mystery. I remember going there when I was a kid and going through Dahlberg's house, and the grand piano, which is a Swedish kind of painted piano, had been thrown off into the lake, and we went down into the boathouse, and someone had taken an axe and chopped the hole in the side of the boat. You know, I mean, I was upset with what.
It was a terrible act of, and it ran on for a number of years.
Yeah,
That well was vacant and nobody was caring for it at all.
yeah, but they broke out the picture window and threw the piano out off the.
The piano, as I remember, it had pine cone painted on
Yeah,
the
Swedish
piano.
kind of
Yeah.
pine cone things. Just unconscionable what they did. The vandals.
Vern, just a question. Did Johnny Barkowski know that the gold shorts was attached to the Dahlbergs when he bought it?
Yes, I think so. That's an interesting point. In fact, there's 2 points I want to make based on the response to that comment. One is that John Myers, who just asked the question, his grandfather was a contractor that built Frenches.
So they say. I'm not.
So
they say.
Well, I saw
I know
it.
that to be true. So they say.
But the Frenches, I saw Mrs. French and Al Jean Mrs. French and Al Jean's daughter at their place. It would have been 53, possibly 54. But that was, I think, the last time up, they were up here. I think she died in 57.
Thank you for your memories, young man.
Well, they say when an old person dies,
They wanted to know when French's
when a
left.
person dies, it's like a library building.
Mike, whatever happened to the Bacchus?
Yeah, he said that.
Bacchus house.
Oh, Tom Doherty asked the question, whatever happened to the Bacchus houseboat, the loafer? Have you ever heard that story, what happened to it?
The only thing that I remember from your brother's story is that it was taken apart and the bottom was made out of steel. And they used that as a boat landing for a number of years until that rusted away and then the boat was gone.
Yeah, I think, I remember part of that story that the hull, on the hull of the boat, it was metal and it was used at Bowman Airways as a ramp. But there was a question from a lady at the back of the room about French's Island.
Well, I was wondering when they left French's Island.
He said the last time he saw that was in 53.
The last time the Frenches, anybody from the French family was there, would have been either 52 or 53 or 54.
Did you hear? 52, 53, 54?
My sister and I, older sister, we used to go around to those islands, and we visited French's, had to be in the 50s.
Have you seen the island lately? I mean, it's well kept up. It's beautiful. I go by it probably 2 or 3 times a week.
Who has French's Island?
Well, I believe it's Elizabeth Hyatt. She had the Bacchus Island. Now that's back in private hands, somebody else. But Elizabeth Hyatt and her family have French's Island. Like I said, they're keeping it up very, very well. It's gorgeous.